Welcome. All rise. I pledge allegiance.
You may be seated. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Judge Conway. The person sitting in front of me, Morgan Mitchell, is the court clerk. She's here to assist me with the trial. The person sitting in front of me, Robin Johnson, is the court reporter. Her job is to keep an accurate legal record of everything that we say and do during the sentencing hearing. Officer Seaman is the court officer, security officer. He will be assisting me throughout the trial. It's his job to help me be the representative to the jury. He can't answer the jury's questions. That's the responsibility of the court. Here today, the court is going to call case number 2023-0147. We're here today for the purpose of a jury trial in the state of Ohio versus Billy Martin. The state of Ohio is represented by the prosecutor. May I ask you to stand up and give your name?
Hello, I am counsel for prosecutors, Regina Whiteside.
Thank you. And the defendant is present in the court, represented by defense counsel. I'll ask you to rise and give your name.
Good morning. I am counsel for the defendant, Victoria Hightower.
In this case, the defendant is charged with count 1, driving under the influence. It's a misdemeanor of the first degree. And count 2, aggravated vehicular homicide. That's a felony of the second degree. The jury's job is going to decide the facts and then apply my instructions of law to determine whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty of each of those offenses. The count 1, misdemeanor driving under the influence, is a misdemeanor of the first degree. If the defendant is found guilty, there is a mandatory jail sentence from a range of 3 days up to 180 days. Also a required fine, a minimum of $375, up to a maximum of $1,375. A license suspension would also be required from a range of 6 months up to 3 years. On count 2, the aggravated vehicular homicide charge, that's a felony of the second degree. That has a mandatory prison sentence that ranges from 2 years up to 8 years. It could be extended as high as 12 years based on the defendant's performance in prison. There is a fine of up to $15,000, and a license suspension is required there as well. It has a 3-year minimum license suspension, and the license can be suspended for the remainder of the defendant's life. The jury is instructed to give careful attention to the testimony presented for your consideration. After all the testimony has been presented, the lawyers will then give you their address as to closing, and the court will make its instructions, and you will return a verdict. I'm going to ask you now to give your attention to the attorneys, who will in turn present their opening statements. We'll start with Ms. Whiteside. Would you like to address the court for opening statement?
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Mr. Billy Martin has been found guilty. I believe that only 3 days in jail, $375 in fines, 2 years in prison and a license suspension of only 3 years is too little compared to the lives he has changed forever. When Mr. Martin got into the driver's seat, he had a responsibility to keep him and his friends safe. He did not fulfill that responsibility because he was under the influence and distracted. Please keep in mind that 2 lives were lost during this horrible accident. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And then at this time, would the defense like to address the court with an opening statement?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, Billy Martin has been found guilty. However, I have reason to believe the maximum charges of 8 years in prison and $60,000 in fine and a life sentence of license suspension are too drastic pertaining to Mr. Martin's case. Mr. Martin's case was an accident. He is a young driver, straight-A student, and also just recently lost his father. Take this young man's character into consideration. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. At this time, in the interest of time, we're going to skip over the actual trial, proceed to taking the verdict. My understanding is that the jury has reached a verdict. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. I'd ask the foreperson then to give the verdict to Officer Seaman. Thank you. All right. The verdict is that the defendant is guilty on all counts. At this time, the court has, I should say first, do either attorneys have any reason why we should not proceed to sentence?
No, Your Honor.
All right, then. At this time, the court's had the opportunity to review a pre-sentence report that was dated April 13th of this year. Are there any additions or objections to that report?
No, Your Honor.
The court also had an opportunity to review the written victim impact statements that were submitted here. Are any of the victims present, and would they like to address the court?
Yes, Your Honor. Would Miss Kelly Jones, parent of the victim, please take the stand?
All right, Miss Jones, what would you like me to know?
He took away the best thing in my life. My daughter was only 12 years old. I was so much ahead of her. I will never be whole again. We were just heading to the store. You will be haunted, and as will I by her screams.
Thank you. And then on behalf of the state, would the prosecutor like to address the court?
Your Honor, the carelessness and selfish acts of the defendant resulted in the death of 2 individuals and the permanent loss of a limb to another. Katie Graham was killed instantly on site of the accident. Janie Jones was life-flighted to the ER but succumbed to her internal injuries and expired on the operating table. These families will never be the same. We ask the full extent of the punishment allowed in the state of Ohio to be imposed on Mr. Martin today as a result of his recklessness.
And at this time, would the defense like to address the court?
Yes, Your Honor. Would Mary Otto please take the stand?
All right, and the defense may inquire.
How do you know the defendant?
Billy and I go to school together.
What do you want the court to know about Mr. Martin?
He's a good friend who I have known since 3rd grade. He's one of the nicest people I know. Billy has always been one of the smartest boys in our class. This was an accident.
Thank you, Ms. Earl. Would Eric Butler please take the stand?
Billy, Billy and I have been good friends forever, and I feel horrible that the accident happened, but I don't hold my being in a wheelchair for the rest of my life against him. I will miss all the things that we used to do together.
Thank you, Mr. Butler.
At this time, then, does the defendant wish to address the court?
Yes, he does, Your Honor.
high school senior now. I live with my mom and younger brother. My father died a few years ago. I watch my brother after school until my mom comes home from work. Then I go to my job and get back at 10 p.m. I do homework and then go to bed. My father died in a car accident, so it's just the three of us.
Tell us what happened on the evening that you felt like.
It was prom, and I was the driver because my car is nicer than Eric's. I was nervous getting ready, so I thought I would drink a shot of whiskey and smoke before picking everyone up.
What were you nervous about?
I really liked Katie, but I can't dance at all. I didn't want to embarrass her. I thought it would calm my nerves. I never meant for any of this to happen. I will never forgive myself for all that has happened. Mr. and Miss Cutler, I am so sorry about what happened to Eric. Eric, I know you were going to be a great college football player until the accident. I am so very sorry.
What happened to Father then?
Katie and Mary were talking about funny TikTok dances, and I looked for just a moment, and then the car was in front of us. I couldn't turn away fast enough, and I hit Miss Jones' car.
Who do you think was at fault for this accident?
I do. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have taken my eyes off the road, and I shouldn't have drank, and I shouldn't have smoked.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Ms. Hightower, do you have anything else to add before we proceed with the sentence?
Yes, Your Honor. These convictions will be a horrible memory for everyone. This accident changed so many lives. This was exactly that, an accident. This young inexperienced driver made some grave decisions that resulted in the death of two individuals. Prior to this incident, Billy had a evaluation with a 4.08 student and the children of his family was losing his father. We understand that Billy needs to pay for his actions, but we do ask that he take these factors into consideration when filling out his sentence. He is a good kid that made some bad decisions one day. Thank you for taking the Billy character into consideration.
All right, thank you. The court in sentencing is cognizant of the overriding purposes, including the protection of the public from future crimes by the defendant, the protection of the public from future crimes, and the punishment of the defendant. In attempting to achieve these overriding purposes, the court has considered rehabilitation of the defendant and the need to incarcerate the defendant. In passing the sentence, the court has tried to achieve those overriding purposes, and as it makes this a sentence, it reflects on the seriousness of the defendant's conduct and its impact on the victims, while being consistent with the sentences for similar crimes and similar defendants. The court will not base this sentence on race, ethnicity, gender, or religion. Here, the offense resulted in the tragic death of Katie Graham and Jamie Jones, and their friends and family will continue to suffer serious psychological and emotional and financial losses as well. Not only was the defendant reckless in drinking and driving, he was engaged in distracted driving. Distracted driving is when a motorist focuses on anything other than driving, even for a few seconds. It can include using cell phones, texting or talking, using apps, fiddling with the entertainment systems, eating or drinking or talking to passengers, or just watching the scenery. A distraction can be visual, where the driver's eyes are on anything other than the road, or manual, where the driver takes one hand or both off of the steering wheel, or cognitive, where the driver thinks about something unrelated to his driving. Here, this is a tragic case, and there's no way that we can make the families in this matter whole again. I just hope that this sentence will send a message to the community that it's a very serious matter to engage in impaired or distracted driving. In looking at the sentencing factors here, the defendant has no prior delinquency adjudications, he has no prior convictions, he's led a law-abiding life, and he has shown genuine remorse for his activities. At this time, I'm going to ask the defendant to please rise. As to count one on the offense of driving under the influence, misdemeanor of the first degree, the court is going to impose the maximum sentence of 180 days in jail. On count two, on the aggravated vehicular homicide charge, a felony of the second degree, the court is going to impose a mandatory term of prison for 5 years. The court will run those sentences concurrent to each other, therefore it will be a total sentence of 5 years. The court is going to suspend your license Here, the court does believe a lifetime suspension based on the harm that was caused is appropriate. I also have to impose a fine. The court believes the minimum fine here would be satisfactory of $375. At this time, the court's duty is to remand the defendant into the custody of the sheriff to begin serving his time. This time, the court will be adjourned. You may take the prisoner. All right, good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Judge Conway. I'm the Huron County Common Police Court Judge. I have been for the last 15 years, and we do have cases like this that come in front of us on a regular basis. Unfortunately, we have one pending in a couple of weeks here that's coming up that was very tragic. But the administration asked if potentially if you have any questions, I certainly want to entertain those.
Just stand up if you have a question and project your voice loud enough so we can hear you. It'll be about the process in general, what he thinks.
I can tell you we don't normally have an all-girl jury. Anybody have any questions? Come on, don't be shy. Here we go. How long do they take to try? We've had trials, a case like this might take as long as 2 weeks, depending on the medical testimony that would be necessary. Typically what happens when we have a fatality that would also involve impaired driving issues, there's a whole lot of rules and regulations that first of all have to be complied with in order to prove that the alcohol was a related factor to the incident. So we have a whole lot of testimony from the law enforcement agencies with regard to how they go about proving the intoxication in the case. Sometimes it's a urine sample, sometimes it's a blood sample, sometimes a breath sample, sometimes it's related to their ability to function and perform the tests that we have. But that can take a good bit of time. Then it's a question of the medical testimony. A lot of times the medical testimony with regard to the injuries that were caused takes a good bit of time, and whether or not the injuries that were sustained were solely a result of the accident as well, and sometimes where there's a death involved, whether they in fact caused the death or whether there might have been some intervening causes of death as well. So if you were on a jury for this type of case, you could probably typically figure it would get done within a week, but there are some that might last as long as 2 weeks at the court. But that's a good question.
Have you ever sentenced someone to death row?
I have not had the opportunity to do that at this point, and I don't say that I look forward to that in any sense. We have one case pending in our court now where the defendant does have a death specification. He is still set for trial, and certainly at this point is presumed to be innocent, and there's no casting aspersions on that, but that would be, at this point, there's only ever been that case that's come before me in the 15 years where that was a possibility. So that's another good question. I have, on more than a couple occasions, sentenced someone to a life in prison, depending on the nature of the offense, so that has happened. Any other questions? Her question is, what's the youngest person that I've had to deal with? And I would think that that would be 16, what happens, as maybe some of you know, if you're under 18, you are generally sent to the juvenile court for prosecution of crimes. There are a certain set of serious offenses for which there's what's called a bind-over process. Depending on your age, sometimes that's a mandatory bind-over process, and it requires the juvenile court to send the case up to our court for sentencing, and then you're treated as an adult at that time. Other times, it's at the discretion of the juvenile court judge to decide. But I don't think we've had anybody appear before me that was any younger than 16. It can be younger than that, but I haven't seen it happen here. Anybody else? Oh, got one up here. No? All right, how did everybody enjoy yesterday's demonstration? I heard it was very well done. I want to thank the law enforcement folks and the school for putting that on. Obviously, it's a very serious topic. I can tell you from personal experience that these are the most difficult cases that I have come in front of me, because certainly in almost every case, the defendant was not intending to harm or kill anybody. It makes it very difficult to send somebody under those circumstances to prison. But I do it regularly, and the reason is because we're required under the law to take into factors such as discouraging others from acting in the same capacity, and also the impact that it has on the victims, and there's no greater impact than these types of cases as far as the harm that's caused. So it's an interesting problem when it comes before the court, but you should be well aware that every time you get behind the wheel and you've had a drink, you have someone drive in front of you and they're at fault for it. You're still responsible if you've been drinking, whether you caused the accident or not. So you could have very, very dire circumstances. So first of all, make sure that you don't drink and drive, and make sure that you have certainly avoid distracted driving as well. I know that's tougher to do with everyone having a cell phone now, but hopefully we'll get to the point where Bluetooth will resolve some of those problems for us in the vehicles, and we won't have so much trouble with it. Any other questions?
Okay, round of applause for our SAD students. Before I send you guys back to the seventh period here, I just want to add one more thing. I didn't add this yesterday, but I implore you, it's easy to remember